IT services, and he can speak to some of our existing client activities, but also he's got a tremendous focus on cybersecurity. And we know there are the new grant programs, the new grant program that was recently announced by the federal government. So we thought that if you all would find it helpful to tap into Roger's experience, he was kind enough to schedule some time. He could talk about cybersecurity and these grants, what we've learned so far about the grants. My understanding as a non-expert in this area is, as I've read about the grants are issued to the states, and then each state will handle their distribution as they choose. So depending on which state you're in, the process for a city or county to apply for using these funds could be different depending on what state you're in. So with that, Roger, I don't know if you can see, but we have a great crowd out there. Yep. Lauren Sullivan from our marketing team is recording this, so we can share this in the future with anyone who isn't able to make it today, or if anyone wants to listen to it again. But with that, Roger, if you're okay, do you want to take it from here?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you.
Yes.
I want to share my screen with all of you here, and want to make sure everybody can see this. Can you see that, Mary?
Yes, sir, I can.
Okay. So I really appreciate everyone joining the call today. You know, my responsibility within Avenu is to deliver managed services to our customers. And as part of that, cybercrime's, you know, top of mind for just about everybody. And subsequently, what does good cybersecurity look like, and how do we navigate through all the threats that are currently out there in the environment? My background, you know, I worked for a couple different companies. I ran San Diego County for Northrop Grumman. I had operational delivery for all information technology to the employees, some 14,500 of them. Run some global operational practice for another company. And, you know, I share that with you because I understand how things work in local government, and most importantly, I understand really how projects get done in state and local government, because it's not always the day-to-day that's the difficult part. You know, a lot of times it's how do we get these things going, get some momentum, how we get them implemented ultimately. The other thing in my background was I did lead the recovery of all citizen services for a U.S. city that was a victim of ransomware attack, and that was state sponsored. I read my first piece of fake news during that. Actually reached out to a family member and said, "Hey, I'm reading the front page of the paper, and everything in this is made up." So it's kind of an interesting experience in two viewpoints. One, what really happens if you're victimized by this criminal activity, and then the second thing is, what does recovery really look like, and how could you be better prepared? And I think if you look at what the Biden administration is trying to do, is they're trying to say, look, let's get in front of this. And I think it's a 4-year grant. The focus initially is on how can states put together a cybersecurity strategy for the state and a plan, and how does that funnel down to local government. And the expectation is that money does in fact come down to cities, counties, agencies, et cetera. So as Mary mentioned at the beginning, it is different state by state. So one of the things you'll need to look into is most states, you have a state CIO, and I'd encourage all of you to reach out to your state CIO, or we can certainly help you to say, okay, when you guys went after this grant money, and I think all of those grant requests had to be in by November 15th, where are we at in that process, and how does that come to us as a local jurisdiction? One of the things that the Biden administration talked about is the current day threat. They didn't go into a lot of these details. Um, you know, this is the 2022 Public Technology Institute's IT National Survey. Cybersecurity and data loss prevention is at the top of the list for CIO priorities over the next 2 years. I would think that will continue. There's other things on the list here that are incredibly important. A lot of them driven by the COVID pandemic. Innovation, updated digital services for citizens, et cetera. But cybercrime's at the top of it. And the reason it continues to be at the top is we don't read a lot about people getting caught, being, held accountable. We don't, outside of like Edward Snowden or other things that we see that are very public, we really don't see, hey, like even in my case, right, a state-sponsored attack against a U.S. city. Nothing was done in regards to holding that party accountable. So a lot of that is off the radar. It's not public, nor do some jurisdictions who pay want it to be publicized. So, from a criminal perspective, there's like, hey, no one's stopping us, so we're going to continue to do this. The way you recognize you're under threat, and I like to say this email wouldn't ruin your day. It creates havoc for you for months. It's pretty, innocuous in a sense. It says, hey, your files are locked, and you get this email, and unless you really get into some of the detail, you don't understand the devastation that could have happened in your environment. And that process, email's a gold mine for information. So one of the things that I would encourage all of you, we'll talk briefly here about how do you create a good strategy. And part of that is knowing if you're under an attack. And I encourage everybody, to build a good strategy for cybersecurity, you have to understand, am I being attacked? And the vast majority, some 90% of the attacks come through email. And they gather information, they steal it. I purchased a vehicle recently, back in July, and I got a phone call one day that said, hey, we're following up on your loan, and we need to validate some things. And could you provide us your social security number? Could you provide us your bank information? And, I eventually told that person on the phone, I said, I'm not going to give you any of that. If you're the bank, then you have my file. I submitted an application to you. You approved it. Everything you were asking me is in there. I'm not going to tell you over the telephone. But those social engineering efforts, right, where people ask for validation, a lot of folks give that information up, right? And then once that happens, they can gain access to your systems. One of the interesting things in our world, right, is kind of post-pandemic. If you look at what happened, we put everybody in a hybrid work mode. Most offices have not gone back to everybody in the office, and the hackers loved it. They loved it because we gave everybody laptops, we sent folks home, and ultimately we opened up opportunities for them to steal stuff. And those vulnerabilities and those gaps in security existed because we were in a rush to get folks productive and to get them home, right? So I said, if you're going to build a good cybersecurity strategy, you really need to talk about, do I know I'm being attacked? Part of that discussion isn't just, are they trying to get to the items that we have at our data center in the cloud or the things at work? Are they trying to get to the stuff that people have at home? And what is our policy for folks working from home? What is our policy for remote workers? And most of the folks that we deal with on this, it really becomes a policy discussion, right? And in many cases, we're rewriting at-home agreements. We're looking at technology to say, how can we give you this capability or not? And maybe if it's or not, you absolutely have to come to the office 5 days a week, right? So Don't think about this just as, like even in the state-sponsored attack that I participated in for the recovery, they went after a person through their personal email, right? And they targeted an individual, and then they were able to get in that way. So that's something to keep in mind. Forbes had an article out. They continue to do it every year. Fascinating numbers. This is a culmination of what was found during the COVID years. 93% of company networks, cyber criminals can get around. There was a 47% increase in government, military sector attacks. What's shocking to me, 32% of the victims paid the ransom. Every 11 seconds, a ransomware attack's launched. People aren't financially prepared for it. We don't have endpoint security, and over half don't have anybody in-house that understands security as it relates to our organization today. If you do a Google search on this Forbes article or the cybercrime facts by Forbes, there are numerous other categories. So this is not, this is just one small section that's applicable to state and local government primarily. But there are so many other references. I'd encourage you to look at that. It will give you a moment of pause, I guarantee. So we've talked about, do you know you're being attacked? You need to look at your architecture. You need to be able to see it. Surprising to me, in the past few years, we've not kept pace with technology. We've not done a lot of upgrades, and we've not done that because of COVID, right? A lot of projects got put on hold. And, as that project pipeline is rolling out, I'd really encourage you to make sure you've got operational visibility into your environment as part of your overall strategy. Education of the employees is the other part. People are the weakest link. So regular scheduled security awareness training, that's one of the most important things you can do. So under this, how do you build a good strategy? The states are going to look at this. And what I'm trying to do today is to help you when you have those conversations that you're prepared to say, how is the state and how is our local jurisdiction going to approach this? And our recommendation from experience is, hey, let's address the first question: do we know we're being attacked, right? And that's, can we see our environment, and are we regularly educating our employees on what's going on? The second part is, could you stop it? Most organizations are not in a position to stop it. And there's machine learning, there's augmented intelligence, and I will tell you there's a tremendous focus in the industry right now on augmented intelligence or some form of AI and machine learning. This is a battle you can't win through manual intervention. It's something that you can see, perhaps, but you really need augmented responses and automated responses where a pattern is recognized in the environment or a behavior is recognized and your technology quarantines that, stops it. A lot of companies are focused on that. I would envision a time where those technologies get mature, but for now they are not. We use a tool called Huntress, for example, where it goes out and looks in the environment, and if it sees behavior, it takes action. So there's things like that where we're moving to a pure automated response for this, but we're certainly a long way from it. And then the last part is, could you recover? I know that I've done a lot of work in Texas, for instance. I know the state CIO there for a while. I know Todd used to tell folks, look, 1 and 2 may not work, right? You may not know, you may not be able to stop it. So you absolutely have to be able to recover and restore services. And what does that look like? That really gets into policy again. How much data are you recovering? How long can you be without service? I know a lot of citizen services, utility billing, public safety things, you can't be down hardly at all. So, I would encourage you look at your backup policies, understand based on these policies, would it really work? And a lot of times, if you look at the history of how these came about, they have not kept pace with the technology, nor have they kept pace with the way we deliver service to the citizens. So, I encourage everybody, make sure you have backups of everything and test, And the other thing that's missed in most conversations is evaluate and verify your vendors. If you had to recover, could you? I had a circumstance where I needed about 1,000 disk drives for desktops because they were all corrupted, and called my vendors and they couldn't help me. Right? They were like, "Hey, we can give you 100 or whatever." So, hopefully most of you are familiar with the term tabletop exercise in your disaster recovery or business continuity planning. I'd add, a scenario that says, if we were the victim of a ransomware attack, or some other cyber crime, could we recover? Could we restore services, and what would that look like? It might seem odd for many of you to hear me say this, but SharePoint is often targeted, and because it is, they go after your documentation. So the strategy is really go after your backups and corrupt those so you can't recover, corrupt the devices, but also go after all your documentation. And I know in a state-sponsored scenario, that's exactly what happened. So, the reality was we were relying on employees, whatever they had in their cubicle to help recreate some of these systems. And that certainly is not the best approach. So I would encourage all of you have a vault, for cold storage, so to speak, where you have offline copies of things that are really important to you. Typically in the application framework, you have what's called run books that have the configuration, tells you how to put all that back together, how it's connected, those things. So I'd encourage you to have all that somewhere that you can get your hands on it quickly. I'm going to spend just briefly on this. I've talked about this scenario that was state sponsored, but the reality is they destroyed their entire world. They logged in 3 times overnight. And as you can see, it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon, right when everybody was going to go home. And by the next morning, 13 hours later, 180 servers destroyed, some 850 PCs, took about 20% of the data out. And, that's a tough scenario to find yourself in. So, the Biden administration is saying, look, and I think on the day of the announcement, it came out in September, the grant, the $1 billion grant. But when that came out, I think Los Angeles County Unified School District was attacked that day. I spoke at the California Chief Financial Municipal Officers Conference a couple years ago, and on that day, Cal DMV had been hacked, where they said, we've been in for 18 months. Not sure who that was, the Russians or some overseas organization, but they said, look, we've been in your environment for 18 months, and we have the name, address, VIN number, and license plate number of every car in California. And I thought, great, they know where my Honda is, right? But the reality is they tried to hold them hostage to say pay. That's not typical, right? To be in for that long. Used to be. Now it's go in, destroy the environment as quickly as possible. So because of that, right, Department of Homeland Security, Department of State, the Biden administration are saying these attacks have moved from let's get in the environment, look around, wait for a long period of time, harvest data, try to hold somebody hostage in the sense that if you don't give us the money, we're going to tell the public. So those days are pretty much behind us. The model now is this one. Right, we're going to log in 3 times overnight, destroy as much as we possibly can, send you an email, and in this scenario, we got an email that said, we'd like a little over $7 million, please. So, that they read, because of transparency, they read your budgets, right? So they go online to your city or county agency websites and they look at your financials. And so they threw a number out there. They're like, well, hey, we know you have this much money in this fund, and we only want 7, right? You guys have, $1 billion. We just want 7 million. So they are very well prepared, very well educated, very well versed. So, this dynamic of being in there forever, they're looking around, but they're reading external now, and then they get into the environment. You are dealing with criminals. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. It is a negotiation. There are boutique firms, and I think this is very telling, right? The Department of State, CIA, Department of Homeland Security, and other organizations that or the NSA, right, that we've worked with, there are organizations that are geared to deal with criminal activity, and this is extortion. So if you're in a state and local government, you might have a state CIO, a state chief security officer, and a security office that has some reach and some partners, but certainly not like the federal government. And as you go down to local government, remember I shared that statistic with you, half the folks don't even have an on-site security person. So the further you kind of move on scale, the more difficult this problem becomes. And so there are boutique firms that have popped up. There are law firms that deal with extortion and negotiating to be a true mediator between you and the criminals, regardless of where they are in the world. So, it's troubling because it's symptomatic of an environment that's really out of control and is certainly a threat to all of us. And it's expensive for you, right? So if the criminals say, hey, I know of a fire department that lost all of their pictures. They went in and destroyed all the pictures. And why is that important? Because of all the legal cases, right? Arson and insurance negotiations and all that stuff. And they say, hey, I think they wanted like $275,000. And that fire department paid, right? Because, the lawyers are $1,500 an hour. I mean, that's how much it cost us. You start doing the math, right? And you're like, well, hey, I can't get from A to B without this being something that's there. So, do I know I'm being attacked? Could I stop it? Could I restore, recover? That's the best way to get you out of this. And so when the states are looking at the strategic plans, as that money comes out over the next 4 years, I think it's 180 million this first year, then you really need to be engaged in that from that vantage point, because this is the reality if you're not there. In the moment, it's pure chaos. There's a lot of difficulty in managing expectations and reality, and the ongoing efforts, it takes months to recover. You have to realize the criminals will give you your data back. It's in their best interest, right? If they corrupted everything and they don't give you the money back, or not the money, the data back, this doesn't work. So they give it back. We asked somebody at, I can't remember what it was, Langley or somebody, to help us with a problem. We said, could you crack the code on this encryption that's out there? And they said, yes, we can. And we were thrilled. We were like, that's great. And they said, but even using our supercomputers, it'd take us about 15 months to get the answer. We were like, well, that's not so great. So these are very sophisticated attacks. That's my message to you. If you're not prepared for it, you're going to have months of recovery, and you're going to have a lot of challenges with leadership, your teams, citizen engagement, those things. So, we helped an organization. They were in a circumstance like most folks these days. They just happened to they got caught in their refresh cycle. They were at the end of it and get ready to do some things like 2018, 19. COVID came along, really stopped things for them. So, their view was, we need somebody that can look at all of our areas and tell us where are we most at risk. And, we helped this customer. We said, hey, what are the goals? Right? Because we have a holistic approach to security. And that really starts with policy. So let's talk about the policy. So, outside those 3 areas that I've talked about today, the states the way they're going to administer this is to really focus on initial policy and say, what do we think? And that really gets into at home work agreements, who has to be in the office, who owns citizen data, where does that data live, how do we protect it, et cetera. But then there will need to be, I think, in the future, in all environments, some type of forensic interrogation. And we do that. We do ethical hacking. We do all types of things out on the dark web where we go into an environment and collect information. I had one customer at a private meeting with the board, a closed door session, where I said, hey, I have the names, login IDs, credentials of, about 55 of your employees. And we bought them. We bought them out on the dark web. And because I have this, I know I could do that. A destructive behavior because of all this, information that was readily available. And then I think, put all that into context, right? And say, hey, if we have these goals, we have these gaps, what roadmap do we want to put together? And it is a journey, right? And those findings and recommendations are not going to be something that you can do on day one. There's some simple things like, let's train our employees. Let's have reoccurring security training. But there's other things that are going to become more complicated around your architecture and around how you want to restore and recover. I know if you deal with the states, I know one of the other things that was in this program is around election. I know on the county side, across the country, I know we support elections. There's a lot of concern, right, about the digital election equipment and how that's protected. And that's part of this, right? So when they did the infrastructure bill and they wrote the request for this for the budget, part of it was, yes, we have services that we deliver to the citizens, and those digital relationships need to be secure, and we need to protect the citizen data. But there was also this caveat that we also have election capability that's digital, and that's advanced over the past few years, and we need to make sure we're protecting that. And, I don't have to go into that today. There's certainly enough press out there about, have things been manipulated or compromised? But it's a rational position to take to say, look, if we've got this stuff scattered all over, how are we protecting it? And how do we know there's integrity in that system? And then let's look at the policy and procedures. Some of those are regulatory and legal. So, that's very important. There's sometimes, the feds will say you have to be compliant to ABC. HIPAA is a good example of that. So, you might also want to look at, if I need to build a strategic plan, I need to set up an organization so that we're dealing with cybercrime. What do I have to do to make sure I'm compliant from a regulatory and legal perspective? I know in that circumstance that I was involved in, one of the things that really got ugly was some data has to be posted to the state. And so in this case, it was a city, and through health services and through some other things, they had to post data to the state. And if they failed to post that data, there's a fine. And that fine became exponential over days. And, it became a political issue for us to say, not only do I have all this, you guys are, if we do the math, right, and this goes on for 2 or 3 months, I'm going to owe you $1 million. And so you're going to have some of that. So I'd encourage you to investigate that and keep that on your radar. The only comment I'll make about this is architecture. It's not perfect. There is no perfect architecture. But there's some things you need to take into consideration. You want to decentralize your risk. Cloud's not the only answer. Colorado Department of Transportation, they were hacked. Somebody went to their cloud instance and, went around the other way. So, take this idea, it's a zero trust framework. Please do testing and have some ability to quarantine things. Operations, I've already talked about this. You want to be able to see your environment, and, key considerations to take away is that, you are at risk. That average recovery cost used to be a couple $100,000. I'm not sure what it is now, but it's misleading. You're going to lose all your project pipeline. It's going to come to a stop. The entire organization will be focused on the recovery. You're going to have citizen impact. You're going to have a tremendous burden on your staff. People in the organization are the weakest link, and they are because the criminals figured out if I get into email and I do a phishing exercise or target somebody and I get their credentials, I can get into your environment. And 90% of the attacks are done that way. There are significant governance challenges, and at the end of the day, you've got to have people you trust. I'm on what's called the 2 a.m. call list for some folks. It's like if it's 2 a.m. in the morning and you need help, who do you call? So I say, sure, you can call me. Give me a phone call. We'll figure it out. And I have been an advisor to folks where I've not necessarily been in the room, and I have other members of my team where we've advised folks, okay, here's where you are. Take a deep breath. You'll get through this, but here's what you need to do right now, right? And then we'll worry about tomorrow. So certainly we have, at Avenu, tremendous experience, commitment to local government, some 4 decades. We do have dedicated experts with cybersecurity, audit forensic capability. I know one of my cybersecurity leaders is on the phone today for operation in New Orleans. Our approach to security is holistic. You've got to look at your policy, you got to look at your architecture, your operations, your employees, and certainly we're across the country. So with that, I do want to open up for questions. I know it's very interesting for the government to take a position that says, we in fact finally recognize this is a problem and we need to fix it. There was a committee put together. It was a year ago in like April, May timeframe, where they brought in Microsoft and Apple and Google and those folks and said, what do we want to do about this? And this is the next natural step, right? To say, okay, now we understand the problem. We understand the magnitude of the problem. What else could we do to help local jurisdictions deal with it? There's 4,000 cyberware attacks a day globally. 4,000. I tell folks, the only reason you haven't been attacked is they haven't gotten to you, or they're interested in something else right now. So with that, Mary, I'd like to just open this up for questions, and I'll turn it back over to you to moderate.
All right, so I've unmuted myself. If anybody would like to ask a question, some of you had already muted yourselves, or I might have muted you. So, well, thank you, Roger. That was very informative. It's always good, even for me, as many times as I've seen your presentations, every time I pick up a little something more, and your stories, I think, are helpful for us to put things in perspective. So is there anyone participating who would like to ask Roger a question, either about the information he went through, or maybe questions you've been struggling with or wondering about that he may not have addressed? And if you do have a question, just feel free to unmute yourself and we can get started. So let's give about 10 seconds if anybody wants to unmute themselves. Or you could, I was going to say, or you could pose the question in chat. So if anyone, we'd also love to get your feedback. Did you find this helpful, informative, anything new you had not heard about or spent much time thinking about? That's also helpful for us. Let's see. So Roger, did you see the chat question?
Yeah, so I know Mark Dupree's on the line. I believe he's out there, but like in New Orleans, we start off with this overall strategy, right? To say we need help to guide us in implementing solutions that are going to meet some of the state mandates. And I talked about this regulatory requirement, and it's just like HIPAA. HIPAA was a federal regulation that came out and said, you will do this. It's like when I was at San Diego County, by the time I left, we'd scanned 54 million records, and we had a long way to go. But we had to abide by that. So you can request support, from the state to help you with building your plan, with uh, recovery. I know in my circumstance, that I've talked about, we reached out to the state, and the state said, "Hey, we're here to help." But I think what everybody needs to understand is the federal government, for the first time, has said we view the national cybersecurity as critical to our ability to govern and to our society, right? So the Biden administration said, look, cybersecurity is critically important to us as a country. And I think what we're going to see is we're going to see additional regulation that will begin pushed down to you at the local government level that says you don't have, just like HIPAA, you don't have the latitude anymore to keep records stored wherever you want to, or you don't have latitude to deal with certain citizen information the way you want to. So you can request those services. I don't know if Mark wants to add anything. I know he logged in, got an ID, and went through the process for the application. But we are waiting to some degree for that, what would you call like a GSA schedule that says, okay, the states have the money and here's what's going to be available to you.
Roger, I think Mark might have had to drop off.
Okay, that's
So
fine.
that might be why he's not responding. Oh yeah, he
Okay.
said he has a hard stop at the half hour, so he has dropped off.
Yeah, and in his case with New Orleans, our customer is the Sewer and Water Board, right? President Biden was there. I can't remember. He came and toured the facilities. They viewed it as national interest, right? That foreign organizations were targeting our infrastructure. So how would we protect that, and what does that look like, right? So in Mark's case, where he's looking at what can be requested, he's working with the folks in Louisiana, and they're saying, hey, you've got to follow these certain regulatory requirements because you're a utility, right? But we can help you with strategy and recovery and some of these other things. So I'd encourage you, reach out to your state chief security officer or your state CIO's office, and work with them. I would do it today. We're going to continue to get pressure from the federal government to shore this up. And I think there's been enough damage done. And I will tell you, it's shocking. If you knew the half of it, right? I think they've said enough, right? Let's get the ball rolling. Let's get some money out there. Let's get some strategy in place. Let's get the states working with local government, and let's figure this out.
And Roger, I'm going to just put my email address in the chat. So if anybody would like to request a follow-up meeting, you all can reach out to me directly, and then I'll reach out to Roger, or we'll find the right person who can meet with us.
Yeah, I think I'll just add one quick comment about that. This is a very sensitive subject. I like to share this example, and this elected official told me I could, so I will. I can't use his name, but we were on a video conference and he held up a sign that said, I am the captain of this shipwreck. So he said, I can't show that on CNN if I get hacked. Had support for 300,000 citizens, was very concerned. And there's a way to have this conversation to protect it from the public. There are times you have to divulge certain things, but we understand how to navigate that political part with you. And that's really important. You don't want to have an audit and then that's a public record, right? And I guarantee the hackers will go, oh. So, we know with certainty that you got to get in front of this, and we know with certainty they're going to push more regulation down to us. So I saw some other things pop up here. One was about November. Yeah, there was a deadline for all the states to submit was by November. And I know we submitted for a utility before before that deadline. We haven't been contacted by the feds yet to say, here are the next steps. And they haven't really put that information out other than to say, here's $1 billion. The first grant for year one's 180 million, I believe. Then they'll send the rest out. But it is tied to all the states.
And Roger, there was one other question before my note. There was a note from Shauna about the 18, or excuse me, not 18, $1 billion dollar amount. And the question is that aggregate over 4 years per state? Do you have any idea what the breakdown looks like?
I just know it. What I just said is what I know. It is 1 billion in aggregate over 4 years. I would expect them to get more money. There's a reference by one of the Department of Homeland Security folks or Department of State talks about another $1 billion already. So I think this is a scenario where it's not been done before. They view it as important to our national defense. And if you read about this, that is how they describe it. This is important to our national defense. So I think a reasonable person in local government would say, if it's tied to national defense, the regulations are coming. And, that's good and bad, right? There'll be money, but it'll be beyond this 1 billion initial grant.
And then Roger, TJ just posted a great screenshot showing what Georgia's approach is. Do you see that?
Yeah, I can click on that.
Okay. So anyone else on the chat should hopefully be able to click on, yep. And I think that's what we're kind of hoping to see from each state, right?
Yeah, every state will. I mean, I went to, NLITS is one of the conferences I go to. It's the National Law Enforcement Telecommunication System. It's what governs all of the citizens' data in law enforcement. But it's also tied to all those agencies I referenced today. Their single biggest problem is, what do we do with all this data that's going between the states? How do we keep it secure? How do we keep the hackers out of our environment? What do we do with all this video with the camera technology? It goes on and on. So, I think, every state participates in that. Every state will certainly, go after this grant money because I think everybody truly understands that this threat is real. It's continuing to grow. It was like, what, 8,000% increase, I think, during the COVID years. It's not slowing down. So I know I've thrown a lot of numbers and statistics today, but I'm trying to impress upon you that, by the time the federal government gets around to saying, hey, this is a problem, there's been a lot of damage done, right? So they have the congressional hearings. This was approved, or bipartisan was approved. And I think, the regulation is headed your way, and, you need to do the best you can to get in front of it. And we can certainly help you.
Great. Does anyone else have questions or comments? Or Roger, any other last minute thoughts?
No, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today. Mary, thank you for setting this up, and I am available, talk off the record with anybody. We do a lot of that in our day job. If you just want to call and say, hey, what do you think about this? I'll give you an honest answer and, help you out. So thank you again.
Wonderful. Well, I am happy to follow up with anything that folks might find helpful, whether it's research or setting up additional calls. So just feel free to reach out, and thank you all for taking the time to join us today. Hope everybody has a great day, and we'll go ahead and end the call now. Bye-bye.